Hi guys, Dan the Mountain Man here, and today we are in Charleston, South Carolina. We're getting ready to take a carriage ride with Palmetto Carriage Works. This is a little red barn. I'll put a link down below to the website, and they're at 8 Garner Street or something like that. I'll also put the address in the description as well. This will be the second tour I've taken with them. So the tours are randomly picked by the city, so they have no control over which ones, but they do a really great job here. So let's go take this tour and see where we go and enjoy it. Okay guys, well, let's get this tour going, and I hope you guys enjoy the tour of the city.
These are mostly church run grass horse. And every other horse you see in the city is formerly Amish. The Amish work them when they're young and spry, and they sell them off to the carriage industry. We bought a horse named Victory at auction, which is unknowingly pregnant with O'Malley. We got a bonus horse out of that deal. He is my favorite of all horses. He's the smoothest one we have. Come on. Here's a nice Belgian draft horse to our left. You don't know what part of town we get to go into on this tour yet. The city distributes these tours randomly. And we may actually go to this area. That's Anthem. That's the oldest suburb of Charleston. It's back in 1746 or something. This is the point where I'd like to get to know everybody visiting from on my tour. So where are you guys visiting from?
Carolina.
Carolina Beach. First time here in Charleston for y'all? Back there. And that's on the second row. Paramount, Florida. First time in Charleston for y'all? And you guys in the last row?
Hendersonville, North Carolina.
Y'all been here before?
Yes. Huh? Yeah.
And they distribute the tours up in this gatehouse at the corner of the parking lot. When we pull up there, they're going to turn on an old bingo machine, and one of 5 different colored ping pong balls will pop up in the middle. That's how they randomly distribute the tours here. I would recommend checking out this market if you haven't yet. They just recently reopened. They were closed down for a couple months because of COVID. Nowadays they're set up on the outside. Normally they're all inside here, but they had set up on the outside. This is the central market for Charleston, though. Well worth checking out while you're here.
Yeah, we're going to check it out.
Distribute the tours. That gentleman up here at the bingo machine is a tourism officer. They monitor the tours. He just ran the bingo machine for us, which determines which route we get to go on.
What's the race so I can get one?
Yes.
Hey, I have Carriage 298 with O'Malley, and I have 6 adults. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, now all tours are good here in Charleston. The really good news is we got professionals. Tour 1A, this is the coveted tour. If you don't like this tour, you're not going to like the tour. So, instead of this market every day but Christmas Day, except for the COVID period. They open up here at 9:30 in the morning and they break down at 5:30. They recently closed this off just so they can actually set up out here on the outside edge. We're all on the underside. But that leaves a lot of emergencies without any place to put out there. A lot of the people who work out here, that's their income. You know, these Here we're on Church Street. Church is named in honor of the church directly ahead of us. That's St. Philip. That is the oldest congregation in South Carolina. 1680 St. Philip. This probably done. This one place is lunch. A lot of our restaurants cater to dinner more than lunch. Really good lunches here. It's also a nice place to pick up an Irish beer on tap. Like a Guinness or a Harp or a Black and Tan. This structure here is 1838, so the denomination or the congregation is 1680. And the structure is 1838. So this is one of our most readily identified churches. So if you see a trend of the city that only shows two churches, this is one of them. We'll go by the other one later. Okay, this is Cumberland Street. Cumberland is the northern edge of an old walled city we had here. We had a wall here beginning around 1694, so they tore down the last visible remnants of a wall around 1750. It's one of only 3 walled cities in North America. The others were Quebec City and St. Augustine. The northern edge there, right where the sidewalk is about 11 feet tall and about 5 feet deep at the base. East Bay ahead of us was the eastern edge of the wall. Meeting Street behind us was the western edge, and Water Street, which is 3 blocks to our right, was the southern edge. We'll see that later. Not only 3 blocks, but 4 blocks. By 1700, we had 5,000 people crammed within the walls. This made us the 5th largest population in America at the time. We do a lot of repurposing here. So you can see a lot of farmer warehouses and carriage houses and buildings of that type that have been converted to different types of commercial properties nowadays. Like these first 3 are farmer cotton warehouses. Now that's the Lodge Alley Inn. They've actually carved the courtyard out in the interior of this old warehouse here. The next 2 are more warehouse looking. You got the old warehouse type door on the outside. Inside of that's a regular doorway. This one has culinary doors, and the next one over is a law office nowadays. I like the way they dressed it up with the stained wood, though. It used to be black like these. I think that definitely dresses it up with that stained wood. We're about to go fully residential, though, for the most part. Something like art galleries and bed and breakfasts. That is a nice law office. This is actually a nice, these are residential properties coming up here. You see window boxes frequently on the houses because that displays the front yard landscaping you can't have if you're not on the front yard. And you frequently have houses that go right on the sidewalk like you see to our left. You will see a lot of nice window boxes here. Also these iron discs, you see them on this one and over here, and you're going to see those all throughout the city. That's called an earthquake washer. That's a former repair for the earthquake we had here back in 1886. They say it would have measured around a 7.5 on the Richter scale. Over 80% of our brick buildings were damaged. The walls were coming off square after the earthquake. And this is our core period after the Civil War. We didn't have money to rebuild the buildings, we had to repair them. What you do is you punch a hole through the outside wall, and you insert a rod in between the floors, from front to back, and from side to side. There's a turnbuckle in the middle. And those rods are steady as they go into the turnbuckle. building. I think it has a nice texture with the stucco coming off the brick. That's art gallery at the bottom, bed and breakfast above. I think this courtyard is blue in the church. I love that courtyard. That's awesome. Gas lantern. You also provides the gas on the sidewalk. You pay a nominal fee and you tap into the gas supply. That's why they keep those going 24/7 around here. Coming up on our right is a nice example of our most popular style of residence. It's called the Charleston single house. This particular one dates back to 1796. But it's distinguished by a home which is a single room wide on the street and 2 to 4 rooms deep. Built that way to take advantage of the breezes. If the home is single room wide, you open up the windows, breezes blow right through. That doorway on the front is the doorway to the piazza, which is an extension of your living space. That's what they call that long porch that extends down the side of the house. You would eat and drink and sleep out there. So to prevent unwanted guests and stray animals barging onto your piazza, you put a privacy door down the end. People were much more genteel back in those days. Here's a little kitchen house. I love these things. That little brick one was the kitchen house historically to this next location. Where the bank is used to be the residence of that kitchen house. We had the first of our major fires here back in 1740. And after that fire, they required to have a kitchen building at least 10 feet removed from the main building and built a brick. They also prohibited building any buildings that worked for 40 years after that fire. That was a commercial property, but generally those are turned into nice little residential houses. Tiny little houses. They were coming up on Broad Street. Now Broad here is like the figurative railroad tracks in Charleston. Separate the premium neighborhoods on this side from the ultra premium on the other. On this side you're considered slightly north of Broad. You're a snob. And on the other side you're south of Broad and an SOB. They say it's the only place in the world where the snobs actually aspire to being SOBs. Nice blank lane down there. I like this little office over here. See Lewis Lane Property Real Estate? Yeah. For years I literally thought that Lewis Lane thing was just a playing the Superman thing. But that's a real person here, turns out. And that, she particularly picked that office because that's historically the office of a woman named Susan Pringle Cross, who's the first female real estate agent in the state of South Carolina. Also the mother of preservation in Charleston. A pretty cool legacy for that little building. More acceleration. This building on the end is the old Exchange and Customs building. That dates back to 1771. That is easily the most important historical building in the state of South Carolina. That balcony on the front is where they had the first reading of the Declaration of Independence in South Carolina. On the interior is where they ratified the U.S. Constitution in South Carolina back in 1788. Come on. No, can't do that. Gotta do this. Over here. Go by that. He doesn't like to go over grades. They create a little situation with that. Some also don't like to go over those metal plates, so they create a little bit of a maze for her right there. She refuses to go over those plates, so that will not happen. Here's an old tavern. That building is one of 2 in the city that alleged to be the oldest building in the city. About 1700 for that building. The tavern originally since then a liquor store. Those red dots represent the rising and the setting of the sun. This is the opening and closing time for liquor stores in South Carolina. They're called red dot stores. And we're about to hit Rainbow Road, which is one of our celebrated parts of the city. This is one of the things that's covered on this tour. But before we get to that, I want to show you what I really like, which is kitchen house. Now that's an adorable little kitchen house here, is it not?
Yeah.
That was the kitchen. All these have those behind them. You would have to go back in there, but this is the only one you can really see well from here. But that would have been where they actually made the meals. Nowadays, that's a $600,000 house. This is Rainbow Road, though. This is one of of the more visually impressive parts of the city. These were actually shops at the bottom and had 2 to 3 floors of residence above for the shop owner. There would have been no access internally from the shop to the residence. You had to go to the rear of the building, sort of like a fire escape entrance. Many of the people they dealt with on a regular basis having access to their homes. This wasn't the nicest part of town historically. See these streets to our left, these used to be piers owned by these families. So this would have been a wharf or a pier owned by the Azure family. See about halfway down where the Cobblestone's in, that's where land ended and where the pier would have started. And on any given day during the colonial street, there were up to 150 massive installed off this wharf going out. And also the ship came to pretty nefarious characters. You know, the sailors of those days weren't very virtuous. They were hanging out a lot in this part of town, so this is a pretty sketchy part of town. Back in 1911, one of our local ladies, I mentioned her earlier, Susan Pringle Frost, she bought one of these properties and fixed it up. And she had an open house to show off what she had accomplished with the house, and people were so impressed they started to buy these up. And that began not just the revitalization of this part of town, but Charleston generally. She's considered the mother of preservation in Charleston. She started the Preservation Society back in 1920. First preservation society in America. These date as early as 1720 and average probably around 1760. This is my favorite of it. It's a little distinctive with the nice recessed top. Got the really nice wrought iron. That's the English style. Heated and beaten into shape by a blacksmith with a hammer, a forge, and an anvil. What I really love about this one is this path. I think that path is singular. That's awesome, is it not? I love that thing. Only $3.2 million for that now. Dates back to 1720. This is probably the most photographed house on the street coming up to the right. But it's based on a misconception. People see this blue marker here and they think it's an historic house. It's an historic site. One of our governors, Thomas Smith, was born at this site back in 1694. House itself, no more historic than I am. 1968 for that house. Well, like I mentioned, these are pre-revolutionary. So these are average around 1760 blocks, I believe. There's another type of earthquake blocker. See the cross? This one also has one. There's a boot scraper. Those were used in the pre-welcome mat days to scrape the debris off your shoes and boots. This guy has ornate earthquake washers in the form of the stars. He also has the cool feature of in the proper order, 3 columns in ascending order on his piazza. So it starts with the Doric, simple to the capitals, and it goes up to the Ionic with scroll on the edge, and then the Corinthian. That's the proper order, 3 columns in ascending order. Love those kind of details here. Here's a more typical boot scraper. See the way it scrolls around in that wrought iron factor. Now we're going to be exiting the historic landmass of the city here in a moment. This seawall was built here back in 1818. Prior to the seawall, we would be about in land here. About into the marsh here, about 4 houses before the seawall happened. Then they built the seawall, and then next thing you know, this is the most premium part of town, which used to be marsh. We're about to enter the most prestigious part of the city here. Y'all familiar with Stephen Colbert? He was raised in this house. Well, he wasn't known locally as Colbert, he was a Colbert. But he is from a French Huguenot family, so Colbert is the proper pronunciation, but they were never known as the Colberts historically. That's actually the last house on old land right there. That was built in 1810. And then you'd have Water Street, which used to be Vandross Creek. And then after the creek was the marsh. So all these houses up here coming up after Water Street date after the seawall. That wasn't even possible before the seawall. That was heavily marsh. This one I like because that has an exposed earthquake rod. The only one I've seen in town with an exposed earthquake rod. See down the side? And you got the turnbuckle in the middle. The rods are threaded as they go into that turnbuckle. Turn the turnbuckle through the walls and square. Water Street, I mentioned, used to be a creek, Van Bross Creek. Those are hitching posts for boats. This was known as the Compromise House. Legend has it husband and wife wanted different styles of architecture, so they compromised. One side's Italianate and the other's Greek Revival. This one is now 5 separate condominiums. So a lot of these have been subdivided nowadays. But otherwise, you got a $11 million house here. Look at how deep this thing goes. That curve is only halfway back because the price is that curve. Now look at how far back in the lot that thing goes. Way back in there. This is the first one going out here. And I mentioned the seawall didn't happen until 1818. It took 7 years to fill in out here. And then they built the Edmundston-Alston house back in 1825. It was built by the Edmundston family. They're a wealthy merchant and wharf-owning family. They ran into financial difficulty by 1838 and sold it to the Alstons, one of our wealthy rice plantation-owning families. One of those guys still lives here on the 3rd floor. The rest of the museum house, and the best of our museum houses, they have the original furnishings left behind by the Alstons still preserved. So you don't get any more accurate interior decor-wise than what you'll find here. This is the newest one out here. This one's built in 1920. Built in an imported Italian yellow brick. Not at all typical of Charleston architecture. In fact, to me, it's sort of reminiscent of something the Beverly Hillbillies might live in. I do like the creeping fig, though, on the rise of the stairs and on the building. That's what you call the Japanese creeping fig. That's our version of an English ivy. Unlike the ivy, the creeping fig doesn't burrow into drinking water and damage the surface. We use a lot of that because that adds the character without the downside. This is 1847 for this one. He's got marble steps damaged by the earthquake of 1886. I like this wrap-around porch. He also has an old carriage house with a car collection back there. Those bays are open. He's got a 67 T-Bird and a 67 and a Model T. This one should have columns like the next one. Columns toppled over during the earthquake of 1886. It had columns and porticos just like this one. Now, back in those days, these people were poor. After the Civil War, they couldn't afford to replace these columns. According to the local paper, they had an article about this house several years ago, and they alleged it would cost $850,000 to replace those columns. But they're brick, which is stuccoed over and sculpted. Not just any kind of artisan can do that kind of thing. And if you can, you can charge pretty much what you please. See that blue page in the window? That's a Board of Architecture View hearing notice. Anytime you want to renovate anything on the exterior down to the paint job, you have to get the board's permission. On the second line of that page, it's going to say what they're proposing to renovate. In this case, I'm thinking the exterior paint. This is one of my favorites. This one dates back to 1838. Got the lion's head earthquake washer covers. See that roping around the door? That roping is the ancient Chinese symbol of a wealthy shipping merchant. It's supposed to be the size of a pinky finger. We use it a little ostentatiously here in Charleston. That is the biggest example of roping in the entire city right there. That is the Roper family. That's the Roper mansion.
I like this one.
If we look off to our left, you see the island out there in the middle of the harbor with the flagpole sticking up. That's Fort Sumter. First shots of the Civil War were fired from Fort Johnson, which is over here on this land map. You see a building with a bunch of windows on it towards the end. That's where Fort Johnson is. And the first shots of the Civil War were from Fort Johnson on to Fort Sumter on April 12th of 1861. Beginning of the war, we were led by General Beauregard. He was a major artillery expert, and he had 58 batteries and forts all over this area. This area was dotted with forts at the beginning of the war. This is just one of many, popularly called the Battery, technically White Point Garden. These are authentic cannons. They're not original to this area. We evacuated our cannons. We were occupied by the North. In fact, there was one large cannon sitting where we are now, which was too large to move when they evacuated. So they blew it up, and a 500-pound piece of the barrel of that cannon was lobbed through the air and landed in the attic of the Roper Mansion. It's still there today. Historically, it was too heavy and wide to take down a narrow set of stairs coming from the attic. Nowadays, it's a nice nice conversation piece having a Confederate cannon in your attic. This one I like. This one actually is heavily renovated. If you were here about 3 years ago, it was really dilapidated. I mean, all the stucco would come off the columns, and it was in really rough shape. But they actually, it was sold for $3 million. They invested like $2 million renovating, and now you have an $8 million house. Those lanterns are new, but I think they're awesome. Nice Gothic lanterns. This one has a very accurate interior. A lot of these have been hacked up on the interior, but this one you still have the original ballroom in the back. If you look back here, you'll see they have big round windows back there. That's what the ballroom is. Still today a ballroom back there. This is the oldest out here. This is pre-revolutionary. Dates back to 1768. This is the Colonel William Washington house. It's a second cousin to George Washington, a hero here during the American Revolution. Nice formal English garden. That's called a gentleman's garden. I love the live oaks, especially as they get older. They get this awesome character to them. They got the large canopy, the limbs go off at obscure angles. They're called live oak because they're green all year round. They never fully lose their leaves. This is the most popular bed and breakfast in town, the 2 Meeting Street Inn. A guy down Meeting named George Williams gave this house to his daughter Martha as a wedding present back in 1892. This is a nice example of what's called the Queen Anne Victorian style of architecture, which is distinguished by the curvature of the windows. This one's recently been subdivided. Until about 3 years ago, this was one single-family residence. But now it's been turned into condominiums. That was a big source of discord here for a while. The people who only wanted to turn it into condominiums, the city said, no, we're not going to do it. They finally convinced the city to let them turn it into condominiums. That's probably about $8 million worth of condos. Remember those lanterns I was admiring earlier? We're up based on these. I think those are the coolest lanterns in the city right there. Nice Gothic lanterns. That's glass supported from the roof and the door. That's the old Carriage house for that one. This historically served that one as its Carriage house. Nice cast iron balcony to our right. That's the French style of ironwork, melted and poured into a mold. You see a lot of that in New Orleans. There's the French Catholics, here's the French Protestants, French Huguenots. Really nice example of the cast iron. Our main style, of course, is the English style, which is the wrought iron again. Wrought iron is flat on the edge. It's not going to have the three-dimensional quality of the cast iron. Cast iron uses a mold. Here's some nice cast iron.
This is just like ours.
This is George Williams' house, the one who gave the house down the street to Martha as a wedding present. He was a banker and a grocer, later a blockade runner here during the Civil War. This guy supposedly the inspiration for Rhett Butler in Gone with the Wind. It didn't inspire Rhett Butler. He's a very Rhett Butler type character here, George Williams. This is a museum house. They're about to reopen. This place has been closed during COVID, but that's the first time I've seen that light on behind there. That's usually what they do when they're open. Nice crystal doorway. Also, that's a pretty awesome chandelier there. See the walnut around the door? That extends throughout the house. So we'd have sheetrock walls. This guy has walnut walls. And a very generous dad. He gave the house down the street to his daughter. This one he gave to Junior. That's Junior's house. Junior's wife added the porch, which to me is the best part of that project. That porch is 100 years newer than the house. The house is 1771. Notice over here the way the balcony curves outward. That's an accommodation to a southern bell and her hoop skirt. It was a popular pastime to wave at passers-by. They didn't have cable back in those days. Notice the working shutters. That's required by the board. Shutters here have to be made of wood and functional. Mandatory. You see cosmetic shutters are grandfather's cosmetic. These three are called the triplets of the three sisters over here to our left. These are all circa 1760. You'll see them featured in art galleries all over town, always called the triplets of the three sisters. We're basically going pre-revolutionary, so that's newer property over there. And right now, there's a house here that's like newer, 1848 coming up. And all this stuff on the street is pre-revolutionary. I mean, this guy arguably has the best window boxes in the city. It's deep. The main doorway's halfway down the side of the house. Our second most popular style is called a double house, which is distinguished by a single central hallway with a room on either side. Notice how clever we are naming architecture in Charleston. Single house, double house. This one's the home of the last rural governor of South Carolina. Lord William Campbell took up residence here back in 1775, just prior to the Revolutionary War. But it wasn't the best time to be a royal governor here. And some loyalists came here and warned him that a mob of angry Charlestonians was coming here to tar and feather him. So he beat her a street down Vandross Creek, which ran behind his house, and he got in a rowboat and joined up with the British man of war in the harbor. This is 1720. That's the oldest house on Meeting Street. And the oldest in this neighborhood, definitely. You know, these are all 1760s through here, so this is 40 years older than the rest of this neighborhood. This is my favorite of the double houses. This is a little distinctive. See the way it curves outward? That one actually dates back to 1760 once again. Recently sold for $6.5 million. And that was the home of General Pierre Gustave Touton Beauregard, who was the Brigadier General and commanding Confederate forces in Charleston at the outset of the war. It's also his headquarters. Beauregard is typically referred to as PGT Beauregard. I just enjoy saying his name. It's got a lot of flavor to it. There's Water Street again. That's the creek that Lord William Campbell escaped on. It's also would have evacuated after the Cooper River prior to that seawall. One of our many interior filled-in creeks. There's a lot of early diagrams done by the British back in the 1700s, and they depict creeks all over the peninsula. There's none now. They've all been filled in. There's a really nice museum house. This one dates back to 1808. That's the Nathaniel house. Nice piece of what they call federal architecture, also called Adamesque architecture, which is distinguished by the marble keystones over the windows. We also have the Philadelphia red brick accent brick, in contrast to the locally produced Charleston gray brick, that money-color brick. That main brick is produced at Boone Hall Plantation in Mount Pleasant. To get an idea of the scale of that building, those windows in the second level are 12 feet tall. Someone up there looking at that window and only know halfway up that window. There's also a 3-story, 3-line spiral staircase. It extends from the bottom to the top without any noticeable means of support. This church a lot. Once again, the city with the twin bell towers, really nice stained glass. Also really old. I like old and distinctive. That's Presbyterian called. 1814 for the building. 5th oldest church structure. It's also the 5th oldest denomination in 1731. It's known as the Silent Church because it had twin bell towers, neither of which had a bell. Here's the writers when the Civil War was donated the bells to Paul, knocking down for cannonballs and cannon. After the war, it said they lost so many men during the war that as long as their men remained silent, the bells would remain silent. Tribute to the men lost, never replaced the bells at that church. We've seen some nice stuff. This is my favorite stretch right here. I love Brad, mainly because it's really old. I mean, this is the oldest stretch of fun in Charleston. It's more pre-revolutionary house on Brad than any street in America. Take the Mon House, 1731. Here's a 1732. Here's a 1736. Here's 1740. Both of these were 1736. This one's 1911. On most streets in most cities in America, that'd be an old house. And this particular stretch is like 160 years newer than the average. If that were to burn down, unlikely they'd build one like that here. They'd have to build one simulating the existing primary architecture, which in this case is pre-revolutionary. Nice window boxes. We didn't always have a thing for window boxes. I think they had a nice pop of the house. Also a nice kitchen house back in here. That's the kitchen house. This residence here, there's also a tiny little carriage house there on the side. The most prominent theme you'll find in the ironwork is this Irish harp theme. You see that theme over and over again. See the strings in the middle? Here it is again. This over here is a fire insurance marker. We had the first fire insurance companies in the country here. There were 11 of them. Came back to 1736 with the first company. You pay a premium and they put a marker beside your doorway or in between your windows, which indicated you were insured by that company. But the original version of fire insurance wasn't what it is now. They didn't reimburse you for your loss. They insured they would try to put out the fire. Coming up is the oldest of our museum houses, the Hayward Washington House. This one dates back to 1771. That's the townhouse for Daniel Hayward, one of our plantation owners. Later passed to his son Thomas, one of our signers of the Declaration of Independence. And when George Washington visited Charleston back in 1791, the city rented this out to Thomas, and that's where George stayed. Those George Washington stayed here flags up to our left, that diamond shaped one. And you notice we have a lot of old architecture here. I mean, two of these three are pre-revolutionary. The new one is 1805. That's the rectory for St. Philip's. That first church we saw on the tour, the minister gets the pretty awesome perk of living in this multi-million-dollar house. I mean, it looks big. Wait till you see how big this thing really is. A lot of these things are gargantuan in this back of house. Look at how big that thing is. That's the rectory for St. Philip's, the minister's house. You know, we are very popular for weddings. Before COVID, we were the most popular destination wedding city in America. We've been fighting it out with Vegas at news #1. We're currently winning that battle. Here's a nice bridal shop. Very large boot scraper. And there's another fire. That's the original fire insurance company represented by that marker. 1736 of that company. I like the small things with character, like this old carriage house. I think that has a lot of, I think that has enormous character right there, but that's an old carriage house right there. We'll serve this one. This place is excellent for cheese. Best cheese in the Tri-County area, goat, sheep, and cow. I'm talking very high-end, stinky cheeses. They also have a nice wine list in there, and they're a nice deli also. Really nice lunch. Here's the hat man. This guy's completely made of hats from head to toe. Bold. His feet are sailor's hats. His torso's a top hat. His eyes, his ears, his nose, everything's a hat. He symbolically represents a haberdashery of this location. Gentlemen's store specializing in hats. They also sold things like canes and umbrellas. Back in those days, most people were illiterate. You couldn't just say haberdashery, nobody knew what you were talking about. So you had to symbolically represent it. This guy's essentially the second cousin of the peanut man. This is Broad Street again. I mentioned St. Philip's is the oldest congregation, but it used to sit where St. Michael's is. We're going to see St. Michael's here in a moment. When St. Philip's was established in 1680, it was where St. Michael's is, which is my favorite church in town, St. Michael's. We've got 187 churches on the peninsula. I think the best, mainly because it's the oldest, is St. Michael's, which is that white church structure over there. It's 1761 for that church. That clock in the tower is 1768. Oldest surviving building of the clock tower in the United States. President Washington worked there back in 1791. General Robert E. Lee was there back in 1861. Two sons of the Constitution are buried in the graveyard of St. Michael's. Charles Coatsworth Pinckney and John Rutledge, both local sons of the Constitution. This guy's got another type of earthquake watch. This is the newest type, the way see the S type on the side of the building. That spreads the pressure out. Instead of being a fine point of pressure like those discs, like the next one has, they spread the pressure out. And that is the newest variety of those. And also I gotta say, I very begrudgingly like this building. I'm anti-orange normally because of Clemson. That's more of a Texas orange. This is Gallery Row where we are right now. There's 40 art galleries on the peninsula. Most of these are art galleries. Of course, a law is thrown in. Chalmers here is our longest cobblestone road. We have 8 remaining original cobblestone roads in Charleston. This is by far the longest. These cobblestones are ballast stones on ships from England. When they came here from England, they wouldn't have very big loads, so we are mainly an exporting city. Without a sufficient load, the ships would ride too high in the water and wouldn't be stable. So they put a bunch of these in the cargo bay, which would lower the ship in the water and stabilize the load. Now, when they went back to England, they wouldn't need them anymore because they'd have huge piles of rice, cotton, or indigo. So they'd stack those in the waterfront, and we use them both as early landfill and to pave our roads. I forgot to mention that little pink one there. See the pink one next to the gray ones? That's the one that is probably the oldest. I showed you the other one that alleged to be the oldest. This one's 1694, so it's probably 6 years older than the other one. Both farmer taverns, which I think tells a lot about the historical character of Charleston. Two oldest buildings remaining in the city, farmer taverns. Coming up on our left is the Back Street Theater. This structure dates back to 1807. Back in 1734, they built the new theater here. This is the first building built for theater in America. First opera in America was at this location. And this is still normally an active venue. Right now it's closed down because of the virus, but last October I saw Mice and Men here. Pretty cool to watch classic performance in this classic theater. Awesome. Nice cast iron balcony. That's the biggest earthquake watchers in the city here on the left. French Huguenots have been in here since 1687. Now at this location, this structure is 1825. This is the third structure. French Huguenots are there. This is the only currently active French Huguenot denomination in Scotland. The other one is every Sunday. And they have the coolest service of the year here. It's usually the Sunday after Easter, but they bring up our French Huguenot bishop and they have a service all in French. It's called the French service. There's a nice view down to the waterfront park at the end. That's an early 1800s merchant neighborhood right there. This is nice. The waterfront park normally has a fountain going, but they're working on some construction down there. That's a really nice park. I would encourage checking that out while you're here if you get a chance. Here's St. Philip's again to our right. This church has a really nice wrought iron. You notice a lot of, if you watch a lot of the churches particularly, the wrought iron simulates spheres all the way around. This one has 2 distinct burial sites. You have your home side, which is the church side, and that's the graveyard. And then opposite the church on the stranger side is the cemetery. And there technically is a distinction between a graveyard and a cemetery. Graveyards have a church anchor to them. Cemeteries don't. The graveyard is the yard of the church. No church, no graveyard. And what's more, you can't be buried in the graveyard unless you remember the church. Cemeteries don't care.
the earthquake down here. So August 31st, and it's tilted everything. It's damaged everything. But it left this little tilted. So, one big storm hurricane here goes land into it. That's not good.
See the building to our left with the hip roof and the terracotta roof? That's the powder magazine. That's the oldest public building in the Carolinas of Georgia. 1713 that building. That's where they kept the municipal gunpowder storage here historically. Walls are about 35 inches thick and the ceiling's about 4 inches thick. Designed that way so if there was an explosion, they go upwards instead of outwards. Towards release resistance. There's also a layer of sand in between the layers of ceiling. The theory being the explosion would send the sand upward and they come back down and put out the fire. Pretty full 1713 engineering going on back there. When you see these kind of openings, they need to clean up a little out there. That used to be a carriage opening. That's typical of those. That would have been, we had a carriage house facility back there in the back of this one. One thing, a lot of this brick has been stuccoed over, but if you see them unstuccoed over, you'll see frequently in between the windows, they've had to re-mortar. That's a weak point architecturally, and you'll see that frequently, where they, after the earthquake, they had to redo the bricks and mortar in between the windows. See, the only place that's happening is right between the windows. Here's our most popular alleyway. This is Philadelphia Alley. You walk over to Queen Street in this alley. It's a dead end for vehicles, but open to pedestrians. If you took a ghost tour, this is likely their first stopping place. And they'll come here and tell you that's Bloody or Jeweler's Alley. It's a very popular location to settle a dispute in a duel. And I'm talking about the single-shot, smooth-bore pistols. Dueling was popular generally in South Carolina. In fact, the rules of dueling in America are written by a South Carolina governor. They're called the Code Duello. They're an English translation of the Italian rules of dueling. 25 pretty precise rules of how to conduct a duel. And over about a 130-year period, there were 400 duels in that alleyway. Fortunately for those guys, the pistols weren't that accurate back in those days. And frequently in a duel, nobody was even injured. There have been a lot of duels. As a result, there have been about 36 fatalities in that alley over the years. Some of those are spectators. Allegedly, as a result, there's a bunch of discontented spirits wandering up and down that alley nowadays, making that the most haunted alley in Charleston. According to the experts, we're the second most haunted city in America here in Charleston. New Orleans being number 1. And Savannah thinks they're number 1 and number 3, according to the experts. That's a brand new hotel. You probably already realize we don't need any more of those, but they're still building them. That's the Spectator. They have the best reputation for customer service in the city. Each level has their own butler. In fact, I've seen one resource say that it's like the best thing in the entire world. Some of these things are over the top. Obviously, if you're getting that kind of accolade, you're doing something right. That's a nice place to dine at Crab House. It becomes very bar-like about 8:30 at night, but before that, really nice restaurant. They have really good shrimp and grits and she crab soup. Best burgers in town at the Crab House. If you want a more normal fare, like an awesome cheeseburger, singular in there. This market was a farmer's market out here from 1807 till 1939. Then it came into disuse up into the 1970s. That's when our just former mayor, Mayor Riley, took over as mayor back in 1975. He was mayor from 1975 till 2015. 40 years as mayor. Longest running mayor in Charleston's history, Mayor Riley. Super successful mayor for us. He brought him to Charleston Place Hotel, which is directly ahead of us. That was put here back in 1987. Helped to revitalize King. Before that was built, King was in dilapidation. That waterfront park I talked about, he brought that in. main thing he did was clean up this market. That was a sketchy part of town for decades before he took over. The best thing to get out in the market was an illegal tattoo before Mayor Wiley took over. Now the heart of tourism. Henry's here is awesome. This is one of my favorites. They've been around since 1932. That's a lot of longevity for a place. Definitely one of the better examples of shrimp and grits and sea crab soup in the city. Basically the same thing that's said about the Crab House, but I like them slightly better than the Crab House. Very similar otherwise. I mentioned the open container issue here in Charleston. This is a temporary solution. The booze pops. That's a food item. It's a popsicle, so they're taking advantage of a loophole. You can't have a Guinness, but you can have a popsicle with 3 ounces of alcohol on it. The city will eventually close that loophole, but for now, that's your solution. There's Hank's Seafood to our left, right across the parking lot. On the other side of that truck over there. Best seafood in the city. That's my assessment. Also, the city's sitting there for like 20 years in a row. Well, that's the best seafood in Charleston. Here we got a very close-up view of the Japanese creeping pig. See here, it roots at the ground level, and then it builds up the building. And you can see it's not burrowing in because it's sitting right on the surface of glass here. It'll come out to here too if you let it. That's a trimmed up version of it. But it does have some nice character to the building. Turn it to the barn. Please wait to make sure we're clipped off until I give instructions. Get off the carriage. If she's not clipped, she can move abruptly, and that won't be the best thing if you're getting off at the same time. Also, if you have some kind of ticket you got, some of you do it online and you may not have a ticket. If you have a ticket, please give me that. I'm supposed to collect those.
We'll be with you momentarily. We're almost there.
Pretty active out there.
Well, guys, that was our tour here, and I really enjoyed it. We got a chance to go see the battery, and got to go see the St. Philip's, St. Michael's. Really nice tour of the city we had. So I highly recommend this. This is Palmetto Carriage Works. And our guide, I didn't catch his name, but he did a really good job at telling us what it was. I heard him perfectly fine. So, well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this tour. Also, I do recommend that there's a parking area on Ashton Street, which is in behind the thing. There is parking, city parking over here, but you get to pay. But if you park in behind the road that goes in behind the barn, I'll put it in the description too. Parking's included in the price of your carriage tour. So, all right, guys. Well, you guys enjoy your day, and I'll see you next video. And enjoy the day that the Lord has given you. I'll see you later.